welcome to the 7th edition of the About IBD podcast. I'm your host, Amber Tresca. If you're joining me for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 1989 when I was 16 years old, and I had two-step J-pouch surgery in 1999 when I was 26. I'm also an IBD writer and patient educator. I've been doing that since 2000, and you can find all of the information that I've written about IBD on verywell.com. You can also find me at my personal website, aboutibd.com, where you're going to get more of my story and some of my own opinions, if you like that sort of thing. On this episode of the podcast, I was able to interview the president and CEO of Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, Michael Osso. They actually let me come into their New York offices and interview him in his personal office. It was really amazing to be able to go and speak with him and for him to make time for me. And what we talked about was clinical trials. Why is this an important conversation to have? Well, I've been talking a lot about clinical trials with people in industry, with patients, because of course I'm always talking to patients, and now I'm talking to Crohn's and Colitis Foundation about it too. Why would we delve deeper into this? What is it that you need to know about clinical trials? Well, first, let's let Michael give you this little fact.
70% of clinical trials are delayed because of enrollment.
What? That's not right. We have to find a way to change this because we need people to be enrolled in clinical trials so that we can bring more treatments to market for patients with IBD. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to tell you how because Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has some big news. All of this is coming up on the About IBD podcast, episode 7, with Michael Osso of Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Our topic today is clinical trials. It's a huge topic. I feel like I've talked about this with a lot of different people recently, and I'm here in New York City in the offices of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Super exciting for me. And I'm here with the president and CEO, Michael. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Amber. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
And we're talking about clinical trials because you guys have some big news coming up on a platform that you're going to make it easier for patients to learn more about clinical trials. But first, I think we need to sort of start from the beginning and talk about what clinical trials are so that patients fully understand.
Yeah, clinical trials, in brief, they really are research studies that are used to evaluate the effects of potential new treatments and drugs that are coming onto the market. It's a necessary process. It's mandated by the FDA, and any new treatment that comes to market has to go through a series of clinical trials in order to be approved and available to Americans.
Right. So at every step along the way, because the end goal is to get a new treatment approved, so at every step along the way, you definitely have to make sure, industry is making sure that their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed, because otherwise when you get to the end, there could be a struggle, right?
Correct.
And that's if things were not done correctly.
Yeah.
So you have a potential treatment, and then it goes into phase 1. So what is a phase 1 trial?
Yeah, so even before potential new treatments enter human clinical trials, they go through a series of animal models and animal testing in order for the FDA to consider approving the launch of a phase 1 clinical trial. That phase 1 human trial is designed solely to assess whether or not the treatment is safe.
Okay.
And people don't always know this, right? So
Right.
phase 1 trials are only testing the safety of the treatment. It's not actually looking at efficacy at all. It's only until, if phase 1 goes well, and if FDA once again approves the design of a phase 2 trial, then you launch a phase 2 trial, and that trial is designed to assess whether there's any efficacy of the treatment. So you've established that it's safe in humans. Now you want to see, okay, is it safe and also effective? Again, if that goes well, FDA can approve the launch of a phase 3 trial. That phase 3 trial is a comparative trial. So it's comparing this new treatment to either standard treatment or a placebo to understand whether or not, relative to what's existing or nothing at all, it actually has an improved impact on the patients. And then it's only after phase 3 that FDA will assess whether or not this is ready to go to market and then approve the treatment to be available.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from the beginning of where you're starting with, for instance, animal trials all the way through to phase 3, that can be like a 15-year process.
Yeah, we talk about the timeline from bright idea all the way to market to being somewhere around 15 years.
Right.
So the human trial period of it can be 8 or 10 of those years for sure.
Right.
So,
yeah. And a phase 1, I think I was a little bit surprised to learn this. A phase 1 is usually on healthy people, right? It's because it's testing the safety of the medication.
Sometimes, not always,
Not
but
always?
sometimes phase 1 participants can be healthy volunteers.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That are just signing on to, usually for payment. To,
Okay. I was going to say that's extremely altruistic.
Yeah, not usually, to ascertain. But that's not always the case.
That's not
by
always
way.
the case.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for IBD patients.
And certainly with IBD trials, it's
Yeah.
not usually healthy humans.
Right.
It's usually people who are invested in this space.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do the same patients typically carry over through all of the trials? Or is that something that you're recruiting at every stage of the game?
You're definitely recruiting at every stage of the game,
Right.
and the numbers of people goes up dramatically.
Okay.
So the safety studies of phase 1 is usually small numbers. Phase 2, it grows a bit, and then phase 3 can be quite large.
Right.
So we're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of patients sometimes need to be recruited into phase 3 trials.
Right.
So
Well, which is what, you would hope, especially as a patient, then a new drug coming to market, you want to be able to know that it was tested on, so many people, and there's good data for it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
yeah,
Okay. So clinical trials are extremely important in the IBD space.
absolutely.
I feel like now more than ever that there's a lot of things in the pipe, and we need to get patients enrolled in these clinical trials. And how do we get this going?
Yes, you're pointing out a well-known fact, which is that enrollment into clinical trials is a huge obstacle to getting new treatments to market. It's an issue that many diseases face, so it's not specific to IBD. But it certainly, to your point, holds back progress when we can't fully enroll trials. So at the moment, there are 450 Crohn's and colitis clinical trials that are ongoing.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So it's enormous.
Right.
So as a result, there's enormous need to be recruiting people all over the country into
Right.
those trials.
Right.
70% of clinical trials are delayed because of enrollment.
Oh my gosh.
And some of them very significantly, and some of them fail entirely because they can never get to the enrollment numbers they need.
Oh my gosh.
It's for a lot of reasons, but one of the key reasons is that there isn't patient awareness or education about what a clinical trial is, the importance of it, how it could impact their disease. And at the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, even though we've been doing some of that for many, many years,
Right.
we've decided this year to put a much bigger stake in the ground and invest a lot more resource, time, and energy into trying to overcome that obstacle.
Right. And I think, in addition, there may be a misperception that you have to live near a big city center to enroll in a clinical trial, but actually that's not the case.
Not necessarily,
Yeah.
yes. So our Crohn's and colitis patients are treated in a variety of settings all across the country, right? From huge major academic medical center to smaller academic medical center to a large community GI practice, and sometimes in rural settings in very small GI practices. Some are treated by Crohn's or colitis specialists. Other times they're being treated by GI generalists, right? Mm-hmm. So right there you can see there's going to be enormous variability in what people know or understand about clinical trials and their access to them. Mm-hmm. Most clinical trials are headquartered at major academic medical centers. Mm-hmm. But to the point that you're making, sometimes patients can be treated in their local community right. most of the time and still participate in a trial at nearby academic medical center, right? Yeah. So one of the barriers is that not only do the patients not understand how they can do that, mm-hmm. but also the physicians don't necessarily understand or have a good grasp of how they can be referring physicians into those trials.
Right.
So.
And from the patient perspective, it's a little daunting to think about a clinical trial. And I was thinking about this earlier about how in television and movies, though, it's almost a trope. There's a person that has cancer or another devastating disease and they're not doing well. And then along comes some physician and says, guess what? I got you into a clinical trial. And it's this, save the day, and that's how it goes. And yet there's a lot of fear surrounding clinical trials. Mm-hmm. And I think people may get hung up a little bit on the idea of, well, if I'm in a clinical trial, that one arm is getting the active medication and one arm is getting the placebo. What if I get the placebo? Mm-hmm. So what can we do? How can we help patients overcome the sort of inherent, I think, completely understandable fear that they're taking, particularly with a disease like IBD that is so complicated?
Mm-hmm. So I think we recognize at the foundation that, at least to some extent, and probably some large extent, the fear that is associated with clinical trials is based on a lack of awareness and understanding of exactly what they are. Mm-hmm. And that's why, through our education and support mechanisms, we want to make sure that we're educating people so that they understand exactly what it means to be in a phase 1 or a phase 2 or a phase 3. Mm-hmm. What that trial will actually entail, how is it going to impact their treatment, what are the potential benefits. These are a lot of questions that the average Crohn's or colitis patient does not really know the answer to. It may be, as you point out, even after learning all of those details, that patients will decide clinical trials are still not right for me. Mm-hmm. But we work from the assumption that as we educate more and more people, some will definitely start enrolling in trials.
Right. And what are some of the educational initiatives that you have ongoing or new ones that you have starting up in order to educate patients and physicians too, I think, should be involved?
It's a great question. And at the moment, we're thinking of it as the development of a clinical trials community. And to your point, that community is made up of patients, of caregivers, of referring physicians in GI practices, of nurses and docs that are at the academic medical centers. And so we want to build a community of people that are increasingly engaged in clinical trials. Mm-hmm. So in this summer, hopefully at the end of July, we're going to be launching that community with a few early endeavors, mm-hmm. and we will be building and adding to it over time. So this summer, we're going to launch a new section to our website. We have written and designed 8 different infographics that very clearly describe and explain for people the process of clinical trials. We've also filmed a video series. We now have 5 actual videos. They're mostly short videos, somewhere in the area of 4 to 6 minutes, that explain different elements of the trial. Mm-hmm. One of those videos comes from the perspective of the physician, mm-hmm. and she's explaining what it means from her perspective and how to explain it to patients. So we're already incorporating and welcoming in both the physician community and the patient community, obviously, and caregivers. We are going to have, through our IBD Help Center, There's going to be a specific person who's a clinical trial expert who'll be helping to answer questions for people on clinical trials. And then in other phases, we're going to be developing pediatric-specific materials as it relates to clinical trials. We're going to be putting together patient ambassadors, so people who are going out, to your earlier question, into GI practices to educate folks in that setting, the healthcare professionals in that setting, around trials. And we're going to be putting a toolkit together of materials for our education staff all around the country to be implementing education activities in their local markets. So the community will build over the year and over years to come. But we're starting by launching this video series, these infographics, a section on our website, and bringing in a clinical trials expert at our IBD Help Center. So.
Wow, I'm blown away.
Well,
I'm completely blown away. And I hope also patients are heartened. I mean, just you telling me about how many clinical trials there are right now actually just, sparked a little fire in me, because I think that that's something that's not known. Yeah. That sometimes we may think, well, nothing is happening. No, lots of happening. There's lots of clinical trials, and we need to get them to that point where they're moving forward. And if enrollment is the barrier, which, there's lots of barriers, but enrollment is a big one, that's definitely a lever that we can push on and start getting these clinical trials filled and start getting more treatments to market if we can.
Yeah.
So
when we talk to physicians and pharmaceutical partners, I think they would, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm pretty sure they would say it is the single largest barrier to getting to a new treatment is clinical trial enrollment.
And that's a shame. I mean,
Yes.
really, if that's the only thing that's standing in the way,
Yeah.
let's get this moving here.
Yeah,
So
that's a big barrier.
yeah, I love this idea of patient ambassadors. That's incredible. So, are you thinking a patient ambassador would be perhaps a person that has participated in a clinical trial previously as a patient, or someone who has knowledge?
Yeah, you can envision that the best patient ambassadors are going to be people who've experienced it for themselves and benefited. And some of the patients that are highlighted on this video series are people who've successfully been through trials and have seen the benefits of them. So yeah.
And they're going to work with physicians as well as patients regarding clinical trials, or mostly physicians?
I think it's mostly physicians at this point.
Right.
But that element of the program is going to roll out later, so we're still kind of tweaking what the approach would be. But it's a big country. There are a lot of people in it, so we need a small army of people that are armed with the knowledge to be proselytizing about the benefits of clinical trials in all those local communities across the country. So
yeah, and I think that there's nothing quite like having a face-to-face conversation where you can ask someone your questions.
So true.
I'm really excited about that. I mean, I think it's really going to move the needle on this. So
we do too. We think so as well.
Yeah.
And we know that we have to attack it, if you would, from multiple sides, right? Some people need emotional support. Some people just need to have a basic awareness of what they are.
Right.
Other people really need to be educated about the details. We need to engage physicians. So we're taking a multi-pronged approach.
Right. And does industry have a role in this as well?
So industry, through their grants program, have already provided some grant support for the program in general, which is nice.
Okay.
It's one of those areas where, again, there are multiple stakeholders that all see the value of this and want to be engaged in helping move it forward.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like a rare confluence where you've got everyone wants to go in the same direction, and if we can get everyone together and start moving it, great things are going to happen.
Yeah. Amber, if you'll allow me a digression, because that last statement you just made really speaks to something we feel really strongly about, not just here, but across the whole organization.
Right.
At the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, we see ourselves as the convener, right, as the catalyzer of advancements that need to happen. So we take very strongly our responsibility to bring the necessary partners and stakeholders all to the table together to solve the problem. And when there's common objectives, the way there is here, it makes our job easier as we convene all the stakeholders to work together
Right.
and move it forward.
Right.
So this is a good example.
Yeah, it's a very good example. Is this being done for other disease states?
It is being done for other disease states. We actually had some really wonderful conversations, both with the Michael J. Fox Foundation and also the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation,
Right.
because we were able to learn from them some of the activities and things that they're doing in this regard. They were both very generous as we were thinking through our own program.
Right.
So that's the other thing. We don't feel a need to reinvent the wheel.
No, yeah.
And when we can learn from our fellow voluntary health agencies like Cystic Fibrosis and Michael J. Fox, we're always happy to. So yes,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
happening in other places.
If they're working on this and it's been shown to work, I mean, absolutely. And I'm sure all of you together are going to come up with more ways to attack this problem and come at it. So I'm going to put you on the spot for maybe just like a minute.
Okay.
I always try to get IBD patients to come up with their elevator speech regarding their disease. The explanation of an elevator speech is you're in the elevator, you have about a minute, depending on how big the building is, to describe something to another person that knows nothing about it. So what is your elevator speech for a patient who is expressing some fear regarding taking part in a clinical trial?
Okay, here's my unplanned elevator pitch.
Love it.
If you, as a patient, are on any currently approved medications, then the first thing you should be aware of is that many patients came before you and participated in clinical trials so that that treatment would be available to you. If we're going to get to better treatments and cures, more importantly, we have no choice but to conduct the necessary clinical trials. Those clinical trials will only be successful if patients today decide to participate. That trial can benefit you individually and, importantly, benefit the entire community in the future. So if you're fearful, take the time to build an awareness and be educated about exactly what it means before you make a decision.
Oh my gosh, that was killer. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that. That was really good.
Sure, you're
So,
welcome.
As we finish up, is there anything else that you would like to tell us about the new community or about clinical trials in general?
I appreciate that, Amber. I think I would say a few things. First, I would encourage patients from right now to begin this dialogue with their providers. It's important to have the conversation and to have it over a period of time, and there's no time like the present to bring it up, find out what you can, and be in a conversation. We encourage in all areas of care, but certainly in clinical trials, that this be a shared decision, right? So the dialogue should be happening from the very beginning between the patient and the provider. The second thing I would say is that if you have questions, feel free to reach out to our IBD Help Center, and you can contact us by phone at 888-694-8872, or you can email us at info@crohnscolitisfoundation.org, all spelled out, no apostrophe in the Crohns. And we would be happy to answer any questions in that regard. We're a resource. We're here for you. And lastly, stay tuned for the official launch of the clinical trials community later this summer.
And the official launch, we're gonna see it on Facebook. We're gonna see it on Twitter. Are we gonna get emails? Are we gonna get mailings?
There's going to be an email blast. There'll be Facebook posting, Twitter for sure. We're going to put something up on our website. We'll publish the infographics and the videos.
Okay.
Yes.
And so
we will use every mechanism possible to make the world aware.
Oh, I'm sure. And then patients are going to be able to come. They're going to be able to find very specific clinical trials. They're going to be able to go to their physicians and say, what's happening with this? I think I'm perfect for it. And we're going to get these trials enrollment fulfilled and get them moving forward.
Yes. So thank you for that, because I neglected to add one last thing, which is really important.
Yeah.
In this new endeavor, this clinical trials community, we are launching a more sophisticated IBD-specific clinical trial finder on the website, where people will be able to input the specifics of their demographics and their disease, et cetera, and find trials that are right for them. So that will also launch on the website in late July.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you another hard question, too. I saved all the hard ones for last. Obviously, there's trials, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. Are we getting as specific as indeterminate colitis, J-pouch, ostomy,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there are criteria to enter into the trial, and you'll have that opportunity in the finder to weed out exactly what you would or wouldn't be right for. So there'll be some trials, for instance, that are looking specifically for people who have a J-pouch.
Right.
And there will be trials that are inclusive of people who have indeterminate IBD.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Perfect.
You'll be able to sort through all of that.
Right. And know right away whether or not you are a candidate as far as your disease state and where you are in your disease journey. And then you can take it to your physician and
Exactly.
see where that goes from there.
Correct.
This is amazing. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
we think so
having me
too.
here.
Thank you, Amber. It was a pleasure.
It was
And
so
happy
great
to have
talking
this
with you.
opportunity. And we are excited about it. I think it will move the bar. So,
Yeah, absolutely. All right, good stuff to come in July. Stay tuned. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Special thanks to Michael Osso for taking the time to talk with me, and to Rebecca Kaplan for setting the whole thing up. I really appreciated my time in the offices in New York City. It was great to go in and see the big wall with the foundation's name on it and walk around the office and meet some of the folks. I saw where the IBD helpline is, and that was really cool. Met some of the folks that run that helpline. And once again, that phone number is 888-694-8872 if you need help with your IBD or you have questions about clinical trials. You can also send an email if you're like me and you don't love the phone. And the email address is info@CrohnsColitisFoundation.org. And you can find all of this information in the show notes as well. So just click on more details or details wherever you're viewing the podcast, and all of that information should pop up for you. I hope in this podcast we were able to answer a lot of the questions patients have about clinical trials, and give a little information about how you're going to be able to find clinical trials in the future. So watch Crohn's and Colitis Foundation on Twitter, on Facebook, and very soon you're going to see an announcement about their new clinical trials space. And you as a patient are going to be able to go in and find clinical trials that might apply to you. But you don't have to wait for that. You can start talking to your physicians the next time you see them about clinical trials, and how you can get involved, and if they participate in clinical trials, and what's going on. So let's get that conversation going. Let's move the needle on this. We need to get these clinical trials fully enrolled. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. You can find me almost anywhere you hang out on the internet, on Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I usually go by the handle About IBD. Please do get in touch, ask me questions, because I love that, because I like to give answers. And one last favor, if you wouldn't mind, share this podcast with your friends and family and anyone that you know that might benefit from hearing it, because it is my mission to help you know more about IBD.